So Meta might have just solved one of VR's biggest everyday annoyances. There's also a new standalone headset claiming to have the widest field of view that we've ever seen. And Meta is openly talking about cutting VR spending while still building future headsets. All that and more coming up in this week's episode of the Virtual Lowdown. What's going on, virtual friends? Welcome to the Virtual Lowdown, the show where I bring you the latest and most exciting news going on in the VR world. Today, we've got a bunch of Quest and VR platform news to be getting through, including a new virtual keyboard that works on literally any surface. We've also got some pretty big UI changes coming to Quest, Meta talking very openly about the future of VR headsets, and a new standalone headset that might have the widest field of view we've ever seen. First up, Meta has started testing Horizon OS v85 on the Quest public test channel, and one of the most interesting new features is something called Surface Keyboard. So text input has always been one of the weakest parts of VR, especially when you don't have like a physical keyboard to actually type on. So floating virtual keyboards is what most of us are left with, and they're kind of slow and awkward. Like using those, I feel like I'm my 95-year-old grandpa trying to figure out how to text for the first time. However, with Surface Keyboard, Quest 3 can place a virtual keyboard directly onto any real-world surface, so like a desk or a table, for example. The setup is pretty simple. You just put your hands flat on the surface where you want the keyboard to be, wait for a few seconds like that, and the keyboard spawns right then and there. The hand placement is basically how it calibrates the height and position that is necessary for your virtual keyboard. Now, early testing shows that it's surprisingly accurate, and because your hands can actually rest on a physical surface, typing is way faster and more comfortable than with a floating keyboard. So right now, this feature is an experimental feature, and for some reason it's Quest 3 only, but I imagine it'll be ported over to like the Quest 3S at least at some point. It's also only for your Horizon OS environment, so either in pass-through or like your virtual home environment, but again, I can't imagine them restricting it to just that environment forever. I'm sure that's just how it's starting, and then they're going to expand it out to the rest of the Quest applications afterwards. Currently, there's no developer API for it like there is with the floating keyboard, but again, that could change once it moves closer to a full release. Now, it's also worth mentioning that this isn't exactly new research for Meta. They've actually been working on this idea for a few years now. I remember back in 2023, Mark Zuckerberg showed off a prototype and claimed that he could hit like around 100 words per minute on it, which is definitely way faster than I can currently type with like the floating virtual keyboards. But that version that he was using then needed physical markers on the table or the desk that you were using. Then in 2024, Meta published new research showing how they could accomplish the same thing without the physical markers. So while the Quest 3 gets the Surface Keyboard, the Quest 3S is getting a smaller but still pretty interesting update. So with Horizon OS v85 PTC, Meta says that the Quest 3S owners will be able to remap that little action button on the side of the headset that is exclusive to the Quest 3S. So the Quest 3 and the Quest 2, they don't have that physical action button. But up until now, the only thing that physical button has actually done is allow you to swap between fully immersive VR and pass-through mode, which is kind of cool to have rather than the kind of double tap that is a bit unreliable at times. Having like a reliable physical action button is nice to have, though the ability to remap it to anything you want is even nicer. Now, exactly what you can remap it to at the moment isn't fully clear, since not everyone has this update, but this could end up being genuinely useful depending on the options that are available to us. Alright, now let's talk about a bigger OS level change, and this one's going to be quite a surprise for a lot of you, especially if you watched my last week's video, and this came as a big shock to me, but Meta has confirmed that starting with Horizon OS v85, the Navigator UI will become the default experience. So far from like last week's news or a couple weeks ago news where everyone was like they're getting rid of the Navigator UI, which in fairness, it seemed like they were, because in the PTC, the Navigator UI had disappeared, but as I kind of mentioned, they could be getting rid of it, or they could have been just kind of retracting it to kind of do a bit of work work on it, and then re-released it into the wild, and it seems that that's essentially what they've done. So starting with update v85, the Navigator UI is essentially doing a full 180 from what we thought it was doing, and is now going to be the default experience in your Quest headset, with the key difference that the Horizon feed is gradually going to be phased out. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that are a bit disappointed to hear that. I know a lot of people weren't the biggest fan of the Navigator UI, myself included, to be honest. I prefer the original universal menu. Now, it's not clear whether the universal menu is going to be an option that you can change back to. I hope that it is, for the sake of myself and a lot of other Quest users, but I know there is still a handful of people that actually did prefer the new Navigator, so I'm really hoping that the new Navigator, apart from the exclusion of the Horizon feed, which I think everyone can agree is a good thing, I hope it comes with some general improvements and they keep working on it, because I'm willing to accept a new UI. It's just the Navigator wasn't quite as easy and smooth of an experience as the previous universal menu, at least in my opinion. So the Navigator UI should bring us the app library, quick settings, notifications, quick access to your camera and related camera features, and your friends and social features, all combined into one large overlay that kind of just sits on top of whatever you're doing in the background. Now, one big improvement is that the system menus don't constantly shift around anymore when you open Windows. It's just more stable and faster to use and generally cleaner. The new version of the Navigator UI also adds a dedicated Worlds tab, which I'm sure a ton of you will be absolutely thrilled to hear. But jokes aside, we also get a People tab for your friends and a You tab for, your avatar and your status updates. But most excitingly, at least for me, is you'll now be getting the ability to pin up to 10 different items, similar to like a start menu, which I feel like they kind of underplayed this feature, because this is something that I know a lot of people have been complaining about for a long time. Like, why isn't such a basic feature like a part of the Navigator UI experience? Well, now it is. You can now pin up to 10 of your favorite or most commonly used apps into your Navigator UI, which I think is quite a solid upgrade. You can now also show or hide all 2D windows at once with a quick gesture or controller shortcut, which makes switching contexts a lot smoother. And as previously mentioned, Meta are finally shutting down their crusade to get everyone in Horizon Worlds, finally essentially admitting that it was actually kind of detrimental to the VR experience, with most users essentially just closing it immediately and it just being more of an annoyance to pop up every time you get in your VR headset. Alright, but what does this actually mean for the future of Meta's VR strategy? Well, I actually covered pretty much exactly this topic in a lot of detail in a dedicated video just last week, so I'll link that somewhere up and around here if you're interested in it. But we have had a few updates since then. So Meta's CFO, Susan Lee, said that the company still has optimism for the future of VR and confirmed that Meta is still building future VR headsets. However, at the same time, she reiterated that Meta is reducing investment in VR and Horizon this year, while shifting more focus towards wearables. Now again, if you want the full breakdown of why Meta is doing that and what it means long term, I covered all of that in detail in the previous video, so I'm not going to repeat it here for the sake of time. But essentially, the key takeaway from this call is that VR isn't being abandoned. Mark Zuckerberg told investors that the goal is to make VR a profitable ecosystem over the coming years, rather than something that Meta has to permanently subsidize. Now, Reality Labs is still spending heavily on research and development, especially around future hardware and long-term AR tech. But Meta expects those losses to peak in 2026 and to start shrinking thereafter. As for the future headsets that Susan Lee mentioned, leaks suggest that Meta is still working on more than one device, including an ultra-light headset and a more traditional gaming-focused headset, possibly the Quest 4, but we're not exactly sure if that's the naming scheme they're going to stick with going forward. Either way, don't expect this headset to arrive until late 2027 at the earliest, and it's expected to be less subsidized as well, meaning higher prices, which lines up with Meta's push towards profitability. Now, some people just assumed that the headset might have been cancelled, but the CFO specifically said headsets plural, which suggests that it is still in development, or at least it is for now. We don't really know what Meta's doing. They're changing their mind a lot recently, so who knows what the future may hold. And finally, let's talk about something completely different and non-Meta related. So the Lynx-R 2 is an upcoming standalone headset from French startup Lynx, and is claiming to have the widest field of view of any standalone headset ever made. So we're talking 126 degrees horizontal and 103 degrees vertical field of of view. To put that in context, the Quest 3 is around 110 degrees horizontal. Meanwhile, the Apple Vision Pro is roughly 100 to 110 degrees. Most standalone headsets sit somewhere between 95 and 110 degrees, so the Lynx-R 2 is pushing noticeably wider than what most people are used to, and field of view, in my opinion, is one of the biggest and most important factors in how immersive VR feels. The headset uses custom aspheric pancake lenses paired with high-resolution LCD displays, and is powered by the same XR2 Gen 2 chip as the Quest 3, has 16 gigs of RAM, color pass-through, a depth sensor, and an open periphery design where the visor can flip up, which I always thought is a pretty cool feature missing from the Quest headsets. The Lynx is also going hard on openness, so we're getting an open source OS, open bootloader, and full sensor access for developers, which should open up a wide range of possibilities with what they're able to do with these headsets. You've also got a repairable design with replaceable parts, which is very nice. I mean, hopefully nothing goes wrong with your headset, but if it does, it means you don't have to spend on a whole new headset. You can instead replace individual parts, which one would assume would be quite a bit cheaper. Now, this is very much a power user, developer-focused headset, not exactly a mass-market Quest competitor. It's expected to launch sometime this summer and will be priced somewhere between the Quest 3 and Samsung's Galaxy XR headset. And unlike their last product, Lynx says this one will be ready to ship immediately. Now, that price point is particularly interesting for me because I do feel like there is a bit of a gap in the market for VR headsets between the Quest 3 coming in at around $500 and the next step up being the Samsung Galaxy XR at $1,700. And while I do feel like the Steam Frame will probably slot right in the middle of that gap, there's got to be that safe kind of middle ground where you're not the average VR user, you're definitely more of an enthusiast, but again, you don't want to drop thousands on a piece of tech that could be outdated in a couple of years' time. So yeah, there's a lot going on in VR at the moment, from new keyboard inputs to big UI changes coming to the Quest, and Meta tightening its belt when it comes to VR, while simultaneously promising new future headsets. So very interested to see how that turns out. But I'm also very curious to know, as always, what you guys thought about this week's VR news. What news came as the most surprise to you? For me, it was definitely the Navigator UI 180 flip that they did. It was only a couple videos ago that I was saying goodbye to the Navigator UI, and now it is not only coming back, but coming back as the default UI. So couldn't have got that more wrong. And if you're still watching the video at this point, I just want to take a quick moment to say a huge thank you to you. I don't really expect people to make it this far in my videos, so it always surprises me when people do. So drop me a quick emoji just to let me know you're still here. Drop me an emoji with your favorite fruit, because last time I asked for a moose emoji and apparently lots of people don't have that. So drop me your favorite fruit as an emoji just to let me know you're still watching. And on your way down there, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave me a like. And if you're new to the channel and you're still here, big shout out to you. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy the content and you want to see more VR news, updates, and reviews from myself. Other than that, I hope the first month of 2026 has been great to you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.